Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hash Talks. Today, we have with us an esteemed guest, Mr. Abhay Kumar, who is an Indian poet and also an Indian diplomat. He has authored 8 poetry collections and has edited 4 different poetry collections. His work includes the Anthology of Great Indian Poems, a book on the Great Indian Love Poems, and Capitals, and also the New Brazilian Poems. His upcoming book of poetry is titled as The Magic of Madagascar. His Earth Anthem has been translated into over 50 different languages, and he has also written anthems on many different planets of our solar system. He received the SAARC Literary Award in 2013, and in 2018, he was invited to Washington, D.C. to record his poems in the Library of Congress. In this conversation, we are going to discuss with Mr. Abhay one of his latest contemporary translations of Meghaduta written by Kalidasa. Abhay sir, I heartily welcome you, and I'm so happy and delighted that I'm going to have this conversation with you.
Thank you, Nazneen. The pleasure is all mine. I'm delighted to talk with you about Meghaduta and my translations.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, sir, I know that you were inspired to translate Meghaduta after reading Simon Armitage's poetry titled Lockdown during the pandemic. I would want to know, sir, what were your initial thoughts when you read Meghaduta for the first time?
So I was completely overwhelmed by the depth of its representation of the flora and fauna, and also the the places and the geography which Kalidasa uses. So the poem actually begins, with a very geographical. I mean, it's very geographic. I mean, it begins with the name of a place, and it ends in the name of a place. So that's very exciting for me because, in college, I studied geography, and I was very fascinated when geography and poetry came together. So Kalidasa, brought this together, and so the first poem, the first stanza of Meghaduta, it begins with a yaksha negligent of his duties, deprived of his divinity by Kuvera's curse, banished for a year away from his beloved, made home at hermitages in Ramgiri, full of thick and shady groves, where Sita bathed once. So you have Ramgiri and you have Yaksha, who has been banished. So it's also like a very good first line where you have curiosity that why was Yaksha banished, and so it's very interesting that it also has this element of suspense, and curiosity, and I think these and then this whole lockdown, because this poem came to me, though I wanted to read Meghaduta for a long time, but it came to me during the time of lockdown in March last year, when Simon Armitage wrote a poem called Lockdown, which had a reference to Meghaduta.
Yeah, right. So the reason why, so I have read Meghaduta, I've read your translation of Meghaduta, and the reason why I found it very interesting is that One being the simplicity of the language, the simplicity of your translation, and
Right.
second being that there were already the original stanzas of Sanskrit available with your translation. So I could go back and have my own interpretations, if required, of those
Right.
Sanskrit stanzas. So having
Right.
said this, I would want to know, how was this entire translation process for you like? What research went into this process? And were there any challenges in putting all this together?
So, I mean, see, I had studied Sanskrit in my school days, and mm, I, I mean, I was very good at it actually. And then I kept, few uh, couplets or slokas with me always, which I had learned during those days. And mm, when I started reading Meghdut, yeah, I, I tried that, what is my level of Sanskrit? Can I really do it? And then, uh, I read it and reread it and read it again. And slowly it started, these verses, they started revealing themselves.
Yeah.
And so I read like a number of translations, So Meghdut has, I think, over 100 translations of, done by different scholars and during different centuries.
Yeah.
And the first translation was in 18th century, actually. And since then, so many people have translated it. But I could not come across any poet translating Meghdut.
Yeah.
So, I thought that, why is it worth doing it? Because first of all, I knew this story of Meghdut when I was in Nepal, serving as a diplomat there. And people used to tell that, this Meghdut actually, it's Kalidasa wrote about Alkagiri, which was the name of Kathmandu, previous name. So that's the connection, how Kalidas connects.
Yeah.
So I was fascinated by this connection between Nepal and India, central India, and how Kalidas connects these places through this poem.
Yeah.
So and when I came to Madagascar, I was thinking to that, this could be Meghdut could be the perfect way to write something which connects Madagascar with India, and how the cloud can travel from Madagascar actually to India, and see those places in different islands in the middle in the Indian Ocean, for example. So that's how, I was thinking that, maybe someday I'll read Meghdut and then try to write something new. And so that was the inspiration. So I started reading several translations of Meghdut, and I found that it needs poetic rendering, plus it needs also to be translated into contemporary language, which is accessible for the younger people in a simple poetry language, how poetry is written today. So that's why I took this up, and I also fulfilled, in fact, my dream to write a poem connecting Madagascar and India, and that's how Monsoon was born.
Right.
And Monsoon is a full book-length poem which is going to come out soon, which is about how it connects Madagascar and India.
Right, sir, right. So as you just mentioned that this poem mainly talks about the flora and fauna in India, especially the central India and the North India. It talks about rivers, lakes, mountains, so much of culture, mythology, legends. Uh, my question is, sir, how are these ecological aspects significant in the present times?
Yeah, so see, I mean, what has happened to us human beings that we have started thinking ourselves, superior than nature. So nature is one side and man is another side. I mean, everything else belongs to man. I mean, that's how we treat nature now. So Kalidas, you know, Kalidas poetry becomes very important today because how do you um, you know do without flowers, without clouds, without rivers? I mean, how can we have love possible? I mean, how can we have even romance possible without trees? I mean, you see the young couples when they are courting each other, they need trees actually. You have Bollywood where you have songs around trees.
Yeah.
So we need monsoon, we need rains, we need clouds, we need mountains with trees, we need flowers to, so I mean, you present these flowers, you are in, you like someone. So I mean, I was thinking this thing that, I mean, what we are doing, we are becoming these bio robots. Our cities are becoming concrete jungles. So how romance and love possible without these? And so Kalidas here becomes important because he tells us that, he personifies clouds. So he makes the clouds the messenger. So cloud here he's a messenger to. So he's personifying clouds. He personifies rivers. So for Kalidas, nature is not something to be revered, like mother kind of reverence. But nature comes as a sensual being, and why Kalidas poetry is still read today, because Kalidas has very fine sense of sensuality in his poetry. And this is something very basic for human beings, and that's why we go back to it again and again, because it's full of, he treats nature as a sensual being. And today I think the best way to treat nature or to take nature, is not to worship it, but to love it, and if we look at the trees and the birds and the rivers and the mountains and the clouds as lovers, as someone who helps us to realize our sensual desires. I think it would be easier to protect nature. It will be more motivating for us, more I mean, we would automatically would like to preserve nature rather than when it is to worship it and to revere it.
So, sir, when I read the book, I found that Kalidas has also incorporated many philosophical elements in his poetry. Just to cite one, while addressing his wife, he happens to say that, please don't be disheartened, for the life is like the rim of a wheel. It sometimes goes up, it sometimes goes down.
Yeah, it goes down. Yes.
Yeah. So can you elaborate a little bit more on this philosophical aspect?
Yeah. So it's the universal dialectic of life and nature, day and night, and what goes up comes down. So he's he's saying that, I mean, it's the wheel of life, and please don't worry. It's just for a year, and then I'll be back. And meanwhile, I'm sending a message. So, I mean, everybody, it says that, what goes up in life comes down, and what comes down goes up. So rest assured that, nothing is forever. I mean, which also is, the philosophy in other great writers' work. For example, you read different poets, and they say the same thing, that nothing is going to last forever. These too will pass. So I mean, nothing stays, and so that's why I think it's a great philosophical point. I mean, if you have to sum up life, it is this too will pass.
Yes, very true, sir. So for me, it was very difficult to comprehend as to how, in times when there was no technology, how can somebody incorporate elements with such accuracy? And when I say elements, it's like the geographical landscape. What Kalidasa talks about the geographical land, it is so accurate, from starting from the central India until the north. How do you think, sir, did Kalidasa research about his elements that went into the poem?
So I think, Kalidasa traveled, and the cloud is basically Kalidasa traveling himself, and letting his imagination travel along with him. So what he does is that, because he was why is it Ramagiri? Because I'm sure he was familiar with these places. He was a poet in the court of Vikramaditya, and the king of Ujjain, who was a Gupta king, and he was there is another story, a play actually. It's called SAARC Ek Din, by Mohan Rakesh, and that also depicts the life of Kalidasa, and how he was in a place, in a village, and he was in love with someone, and then he wrote poems, and he became famous. So he was invited to the court, and then he was given official responsibilities. He was made into a governor, and so in this film he goes back to her beloved and tells her that, this Meghaduta I have written is for you. And so it's a beautiful story. I think you should watch it. It's called SAARC Ek Din, and so Kalidasa was familiar with these these places, and then he, of course, as a poet, he used the imagination of a poet to I mean, he brings in lots of also imaginary creatures like Saravas in this book, and he brings in the mythologies of Ganga's descent from the heavens, and so all these elements, Shiva, all these elements have been woven into. He was, of course, very well aware of the Puranas, and I think all these things mix up, combine together to produce this wonderful book.
Right. So I want to ask you that how relevant and significant are all the ancient texts? When I say ancient texts, I mean the poetries, the dramas, the plays that were written not only by Kalidas, but by other ancient writers as well. How significant are these in these modern setups?
I think they are our treasures, literary treasures, and there's so much of richness and diversity of literature out there. While the West is making this the Ring trilogy, and so many new mythologies they're creating, like Star Wars, and so on. We already have these, we have Ramayana and Mahabharata, and also Puranas. All the 18 Puranas. They're all full of stories, and they're all interlinked because many of these literary, Kalidasa's literature is heavily influenced by Puranas. For example, Kumara Sambhavam it comes from Shiva Purana, and so basically, when one reads these Puranas or Vedas or Upanishads, one gets lots of stories from there. And I was reading a few days ago a story in Maghi, and it is called Aaj Ka Yudhishthir, and it's basically taken from Yaksha Prashna in Mahabharata, and then he sort of he applies that today, that if Yudhishthir was in our contemporary times and Yaksha asked him questions, what questions he would ask and what answers he would give. So see, we have such rich. I could write monsoon because I have Meghdut, and so Kalidas could write Meghdut because he had Purana, So it's a link, because Meghdut, many things are here from Purana. See, in the first verse itself, he mentions Sita. So there's a reference to Ramayana, then there's a reference to Shiva, and there's reference to Siddha. Siddhas are 8th century, Buddhism. So you have, reference to several texts. Literature is all about that. It's about making these interconnections from different periods. These are known there's a literary device. It's called allusion. So this is these are the allusions.
Right. So you're also in the process of translating another poem of Meghdut called Ritu Samhara. If you can just talk a little about that.
So Ritu Samhara, I've already translated it. The book is coming out in October.
All right.
And it's Ritu Samhara is, it actually means gathering of seasons. And that's the first poem Kalidasa wrote before he became famous. So he wrote Ritu Samhara, and that's how he was invited to the court of Vikramaditya. And Ritu Samhara is about 6 seasons. So it begins with summer and ends with the rains. Ends with winter, because you have summer and the rains, and spring, because after winter you have spring, and so begins with summer and ends with spring. So it's so he tells in Ritu Samhara what happens in each season, and how young men and women behave. And what do they wear? What do they eat? And which flowers are there? What happens to for example, in summer, he describes the lives of snakes and frogs and elephants and buffaloes, and so on. So Kalidasa to me, comes across as a perfect eco-poet. Today, we are talking about eco-poetry and our interrelationship with nature. So Kalidasa comes as a perfect eco-poet who cares about these creatures and cares about. So, I mean, I came across 27 kinds of new or different plants in Meghaduta, and Ritu Samhara has also many kind of flowers and trees and so on. So so it's a fascinating book. I mean, a book you can read and reread again and again. I mean, these are the two books I would always like to keep with myself, and it was a joy to translate Ritu Samhara.
Right, sir. So talking about translations, is it right for me to infer that the translation basically is a kind of interpretation of the translator?
That's right, because there can be 1,000 kind of translations, you know, and each person would like to translate it differently, because it depends on our taste, and it depends on how do we see it. So it's interpretation. You are right. And I mean, every text should be translated afresh every 20 years, because in 20 years the language changes, and you know, each generation has to find its own own language. The great classics should be available in those in the contemporary language.
Right, sir. Besides Kalidas, which ancient poet or writer would you recommend everyone to read?
So both poets and writers, you mean, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, among the poets, I would say besides Kalidas, I would I mean, there is this whole, there are these anthologies which have been done by different poets, and I have translated several poets from Sanskrit, and some of them, I mean, these some of these translations appear in this Great Indian Love Poems. So one of the poets is Dharmakriti, and he was the vice chancellor, you can say, of Nalanda University, and he has written this beautiful. He was a monk, and he has written these poems, which I find very evocative. Also, among the writers, the ancient writers, I mean, I would recommend Chanakya, whose Earth Shastra is a fascinating read, and also you know, Jayadev, from a poet from Orissa, whose Gita Govindam is a beautiful poem, today performed all across the world with, and also there is, I mean, so many classical dancers, they use Gita Govindam to perform dances. Who else? I would, I mean, there are poets, there are women poets who were nuns. I would recommend, there's a poetry collection in Prakrit. It's called Gatha Saptasati. And Gatha Saptasati is like 700 verses, you know, by Prakrit poets. Most of them are women poets. So I would highly recommend. It's been edited by a king actually, and so these are like all before. It's in the first millennium AD. Or our time. See, so Kalidasa was 5th century. Vatsyayan is a very fine poet. If one reads his original verses, these are some of names I would like to recommend.
All right. So is there anything else that you would like to add to this conversation from your side?
I would like to read some, verses.
Yes, sir.
Which are, yeah. So like, can a cloud, a concoction of water and wind, radiant vapor and lightning, carry a message, usually done by a wise messenger in flesh and bone? He urged the cloud without paying attention to these, mad in love. For the love seek what is animate and what's inanimate. Then there is this who in presence of your friends love to whisper in your ears what could have been said aloud, longing to touch you, to steal a kiss, is now far away beyond the reach of your hearing or eyesight. He speaks through me these words, craving for you in elegant verse. So
which is your favorite stanza from this one that with which you relate to the most?
So this, there is, I don't find it here, but it was, I have here, something which is about that he tells that, he tries to draw her, Yaksha tries to draw a portrait of his wife.
And then bows down before her as a goddess. Yeah.
Yeah. And then his tears even wash that drawing, So that I found that it's very, very touching and very moving.
Yes.
I wanted to find that, but I don't remember which verse is it.
Yeah, it was in the early part. So I too have your book.
Yeah. He also tells about, he advises him to keep moving, don't stay too much at one place,
Yes.
because he fears that if the cloud likes some place, he might stay there for a longer time. Right. And then he might miss the, to give the message. So, right. I think these are some of the favorite things which, so this, I wanted to read you 102.
All right.
Which it says that, seized by love's rage, I paint you red on the rock. Yeah. And wish to paint myself prostrating at your feet. But my eyesight gets blurred by gushing tears. Even here, cruel fate would not allow us to meet. I think this is something very, very imaginative and very, it needs an extra ordinary poetic skills to do it. It's like art about art, right?
Right.
So it's I think it's very high poetry.
Right.
He brings in stories from Skanda Puran. Skanda has made that mountain his home. Yeah. Change yourself into a flower cloud and shower him with flowers, with moisten flowers moistened with waters of the celestial Ganges. For his blaze surpasses even the sun's radiance, thrown into the mouth of the divine fire by Shiva to protect Indra's hosts. So he brings in a story here from Skanda Puran.
Right. It's very beautiful, sir. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful book, and that's why Kalidas is also he brings in the sensual elements,
Yeah.
where the lovers, full of desire, with their impudent hands, undo the west string and toss aside the slackened silk garments of Yaksha women, who covered in shame throw a handful of churna on the jewel lamps with high flames. But in vain.
Yeah.
So I think.
Yeah. Also, sir, I'd like to add something. I really loved the book cover. I mean, it has it's very beautiful. It's lavender, it's got mountains, it's got birds, it's got flowers, and of course the clouds. And even the fonts with which Meghaduta is written, it's really beautiful. It's a very beautiful cover, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah.
all 100 marks to the designer.
Yes, 100 marks to the designer, really. Thank you so much, sir, for having this conversation with me. I really had a very, very good time. And through this conversation, I could not only understand your translating methods, but I could also understand Kalidas a little bit more in depth. So thank you. Thank you so much for giving your time and having this conversation with me.
Thank you, Nazneen. Thank you for this opportunity. It's a joy for me to talk about Kalidas. And thank you for very interesting questions. I truly appreciate them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.